often neglected in personal reading, and it's not read very often in the lectionary, but it is one of the most beautiful short stories in all of world literature. One of the finest short romances of any culture anywhere in the world. So Ruth is a wonderful story that traces the history of David's grandmother. Or might be great-grandmother. I'd have to look at the generations there. But it starts in Ruth chapter 1 with this family from Bethlehem, and there's a famine in Bethlehem, and they're forced to go to Moab. And you have to understand that as Elias told us, this is the house of bread. So isn't that ironic that the famine is so bad that even in the house of bread there's no food?
Yeah.
And the Israelites from the house of bread have to go over to Moab. Now Moab was enemy territory. The Moabites frequently oppressed and raided and fought with the Israelites. And so you have to go take refuge with your enemies to survive. This would be like beginning a story in America and saying, there was no corn in Nebraska. And a family from Nebraska moved to Russia to survive.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the kind of impact, okay? So this Israelite family goes to Moab, and there in Moab, the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, marry Moabite women. And but before they can have children, both sons die. And the father dies as well. And that leaves now 3 widows. So you have 3 widows. You have Naomi and Orpah and Ruth. And what are they going to do in Moab? All their husbands are dead. So Naomi hears that there's some food again in Bethlehem, that, you know, the rains have come and the crops have recovered. So she starts to head back to Bethlehem with Orpah and Ruth. Now Naomi's name means pleasantness, by the way. And on their way, they get about halfway, and Naomi stops and says, look, girls, this isn't going to work. Why are you coming back with me? Look at me. I'm too old to have kids anymore. Been having hot flashes, you know. It's not going to happen. And even if I did, even if I had a husband and could bear a child tomorrow, are you really going to wait for my son to grow up and be your husbands? You know, this is not going to work. Just go back and try to find some way to make it work in Moab with your father's house, etc. So they cry, and this is very sad. They weep together, and Orpah is heartbroken, and she kisses Naomi and leaves and goes back to Moab. But Ruth won't take no for an answer. And Ruth has one of the more famous lines in Scripture where she says, don't beseech me to leave you. My people will be your people. My God will be your God. Where you go, I will go, and there I will be, and I will never be parted from you. That was actually the text at my own personal wedding, actually. My father, who was a Protestant pastor, married my wife and I, and our wedding text was that. Why do we choose that as a wedding text? Because it's covenant-making language. You see, that's what Ruth is doing. I've told you before, a covenant is a family formed by an oath. And that's what Ruth is doing. She's swearing an oath to abandon her natural family and become part of Naomi's family from there on out. And that, as it were, kind of makes her a naturalized Israelite. She's sworn herself into the people of Israel. And she's especially made that promise, your God will be my God. And so they cry some more, but then Naomi gives up trying to get Ruth to leave and just accepts the situation and brings Ruth along with her into Bethlehem. And then the whole drama of the situation is Ruth has thrown all of her fortunes into the hands of the God of Israel. Not Chemosh, who is the God of the Moabites, but now Yahweh, who is the God of Israel. And then the drama becomes, what is the Lord going to do? Is the God of Israel going to come through for her, or is he going to leave Naomi and Ruth as two barren, forsaken, poor, neglected, marginalized widows for the rest of their natural lives? So that's the end of Ruth 1. And then we get into Ruth 2. And as they're approaching Bethlehem, we get the good news that the crops have returned, and they find someplace to live, maybe a cave. Maybe they settle in one of the caves in the area and try to set up homes, such as it is. And then Naomi sends Ruth out to glean in the fields. And she just happens into the field of this man named Boaz. Now you have to understand what Boaz means. This is Hebrew. Bo means in him, and Az is strength. Yeah, this is flexibility. Yeah. So Boaz is ripped, okay? He's full of strength. And then we find out that he owns fields, and that he doesn't personally have to harvest the grain. He's got young men to do that. So he's kind of like a business owner. He's in charge of all this. So he's strong, right? He's got money. And then but what is he like in terms of his personality? Well, Boaz comes striding across the field, you know, the sun glinting on his biceps, and the wind blowing his raven black curly locks. And the first words out of his mouth recorded in the book of Ruth is what? The Lord be with you, he says to his workers. You see? So he's very devout, you know, carries his rosary with him, you know, observes all the traditional devotions, right? The Lord be with you, and his workers call back, and with you, okay? So it's almost like Mass, you know, the Lord be with you and with your spirit. It's almost like they're celebrating a liturgy out there in the wheat field. So we see that, you know, the sacred author is trying to tell us something by, you know, the first words out of his mouth is actually the name of God, blessing his workers in the name of the Lord. So we know he runs a ethical business. He's a, you know, good Catholic businessman here. And so, hey, you know, Boaz is looking pretty attractive here. So as things go on, Ruth has found her way into the fields of Boaz, and Boaz takes notice of her and says, "Hey, who's the young woman there that's gleaning after the reapers and so on?" And they say, "Well, you know, haven't you heard? That's Ruth. She came back with Naomi. She wouldn't leave Naomi. Came back, left her whole people just to make sure that Naomi was okay." And she's sworn to become part of the people of Israel, and she's even taken on her lips the name of our God. And Boaz is very impressed, and he calls her over, and they have this conversation. He says, "Hey, you stay in my fields, and I'm going to look after you, make sure that you're all right, and you don't, you know, get harassed or anything." And she talks to him back and thanks him for being so gracious to her, even though she's a foreigner and so on. And then he says, "You know what? I pray that the Lord, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, will bless you." Okay, so he blesses her in the name of the Lord, because he says, "You've come to take refuge under the wings of the Lord, and may the Lord bless you." So the rest of Ruth 2 goes on, and you know, at lunchtime, Boaz calls Ruth over, and he hands her some extra grain, and their hands touch, and they look at each other out of the side of their eyes, you know, and he tells his workers, "Hey, leave a little extra grain on the field for her," you know, and stuff. And So it's like one of those scenes from the chick flick where they're, walking around in New York and sharing an ice cream cone, and the ice cream drops and they laugh, and, so it's kind of, we're speeding through this and suggesting that there's some chemistry there between Boaz and Ruth. So Ruth gets home and Naomi's like, wow, you have a lot of grain, what happened here? And Ruth is, well, I found my way into the field of this guy. His name's Boaz, and Noah's like, oh, he's one of our goelim, okay? And that's an important concept. It's usually translated a redeemer.
Yeah, I could.
Noah says he's one of our redeemers. Now, what is that? Well, in Hebrew, the term is a goel, okay, in plural goelim, and that refers to usually your oldest male relative who has the responsibility to come get you out of trouble when you get yourself in a fix, basically. If you get yourself sold into slavery, your goel is supposed to come and buy you out of slavery and bring you back. If you get captured by your enemy, your goel is supposed to come rescue you, etc., etc. So, there were actually a couple of, goelim. It went in order, by who was closest to you by blood, and so the oldest male closest to you by blood was your first goel, and then if he couldn't do it, then it went to the next guy who was most closely related, and so on. So anyway, Naomi said, hey, he's one of our redeemers, so he's a relative of mine, in other words. So this is good. So you stick in his field. And so Ruth does. And so the harvest season goes along. And then we get to Ruth 3. And Ruth 3 is the chapter that gets the movie its PG-13 rating. Okay? Because here something a little bit provocative happens. Naomi is watching the sparks go between Ruth and Boaz, but nobody's doing anything. And Naomi, the mother-in-law, is getting a little impatient about this. And she's like, okay, we gotta, prime the pump here. So Naomi says to Ruth, okay, look, harvest season's coming up. Boaz is going to go down to the threshing floor and have a party, because that's what you did back in the day when the harvest season, all the men would come, they'd thresh out the grain on the threshing floor, they'd have a big party because the harvest was over, and they would drink and so on. And so Naomi says to Ruth, look, Boaz is going to be at the threshing floor tonight. Tell you what I want you to do. Put on your best dress, wash up, look great, smell great, go on down there to the threshing floor party, hang around in the back for a while. When Boaz lays down to sleep, you go up, you snuggle up next to him and uncover his feet, and then see what happens. So, okay. Ruth is like, oh, that sounds a little forward to me, but I guess if that's what they do around here. So, so she gets out her little black dress and her pump heels and wanders down to the party and hangs around the background till, Boaz lays down, and then she goes over there and snuggles up next to him, and it says around midnight he awoke and there was a woman next to him. And women were not supposed to come down to the threshing floor party, so he's shocked and surprised. He says, who are you? And she says, I am Ruth, your handmaid. Spread the wing of your garment over your handmaid. Now that, folks, I'm not going to explain what's going on there, but that is extremely, yes, that is an invitation to something. So anyway, but here's the thing.
Restaurant.
This is the thing. Back in the previous chapter, Boaz had pronounced a blessing over Ruth, and he said to her, may the Lord bless you under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, in the next chapter, when Ruth says, spread the hem of your garment over your maidservant, the word in Hebrew is kanaf, it's wing. she's asking him to spread that's how they talked. That's the wing that was like the edge or the hem. Spread the wing of your garment over your maidservant. And this is what's going on. Ruth is, among other things, basically saying, you asked the Lord to bless me and to take him under his wings. Now, are you willing to be the wing of the Lord for me? Okay. Are you willing to do it yourself and to take me under your protection? And then the drama is, well, what's going to happen? Is this going to pan out? You know, she's taking a gamble here. You know, this could work out really badly. If he gets upset that she's there and stands up and starts yelling and throws her out, you know, she could get shamed and embarrassed and all this kind of stuff. So what's going to happen? And Boaz says, again, the Lord bless you, my daughter. So here he's half drunk, it's the middle of the night, and what comes out of his mouth? Blessings. Okay? He's a good guy. He's got a lot of virtue, even with a buzz. He only has holy thoughts. So this is tremendous. So he says, you know, the Lord bless you for not chasing after the young men, because he's older. He probably thought that he was too old, really, for her. Are we at the place? Okay. Okay, we've reached the place, so we're going to stop there with the cliffhanger and
Continue.
Climax after lunch. Said, spread the wing of your garment over me, and we connected that with the wing of the Lord from Ruth chapter 2. And then Boaz says, may the Lord bless you, my daughter, because you've not run after the young men and so on. So apparently he was a little bit older. Maybe he thought he was too old for her, and maybe that's why he didn't initiate anything previously. But he's pleased and flattered, but this is not the right time or the right place to go any farther. So he says, just go back to sleep, and then before it was light, and before anybody could see what was going on, while it was still dark, he gets her up and fills her shawl full of grain to take back to her mother-in-law. And that's another good virtue that we see there. You know, he's thinking about her family, right? And he's not just thinking about himself. He's not even just thinking about himself and her. He's also thinking, well, she's going to go home to Naomi, and I want to provide for Naomi too. So this is the kind of guy that you want to marry, who thinks about your family as well. And so he fills her shawl full of grain, and she takes it back. And but he explains to her, he says, look, I am a Goel, I am your kinsman redeemer. I have a right to marry you. And see, that's part of the Mosaic law, was that if a woman's husband died, it became the responsibility of his brother or other male relative to marry the widow, so that the woman would continue to have support, protection, and provision. And that was, you know, to us that would seem kind of weird, but in the ancient world that was a social safety net, that you could be assured that your brother-in-law would marry you and give you a home if your husband died. And that extended to other lines of relation, even beyond just full brothers, but to cousins and so on, the next man down the line, so on. So Boaz says, it's true, I'm a Goel, I'm a kinsman redeemer, I'm in line to marry you because your husband was my relative. But there's somebody who's a closer relation, and he has to make a decision first before I can step up. And so I will go and take care of this situation in the morning. So Ruth goes home. It's still in the wee hours. She's got her shawl full of grain, and she goes home to Naomi, and Naomi said, well, how did it go? And Ruth said, well, you know, he sent me home with all this grain, and he said that there's another Goel that's a little bit closer relation than him, and he has to solve that issue. And but if not, then he will then he's going to marry me. And Naomi says, okay, good. He's going to take care of this, and he's going to waste no time in doing so. And that's exactly what happens. We find out that in the morning, Boaz goes right to the gates of Bethlehem, and all the official business back in those days was transacted in the gates of the town, because that was a public area where people were coming and going, and where the elders would meet. And so everything that happened in the gates was publicly witnessed. That gave it its legal, binding character. So Boaz goes to the gates of the town, and he waits for that other guy, who's a little bit closer relative than he is, to come by. Sure enough, about 10:30 in the morning, here comes the guy into town to buy a hammer. And not really, I'm just making that up. But anyway, so in he comes to do something in town, and Boaz says, hey, my brother, come over here. I need to talk with you. And so he sits his relative down, and he calls the elders of the city over. They're probably sipping espressos or something, and calls them over and says, now listen up to what's going on. You guys got to witness this. And he says, look, we both know that the widow of Kilion came back. That's Ruth, the Moabitess, and she's back here with Naomi, and he's a relative of ours, and so we're in the line of Goalim here. We're in the line of redemption, and you're the first in line, and there is this piece of property, of course, that Mahlon left that we have to buy back. And so, do you want to do that? Do you want to buy back the property? And the kinsman says, oh yeah, sure, okay, I'll do that. I'll buy back the property of my deceased relative. And then Boaz says, oh yeah, one more thing. When you buy back the property, you also get Ruth as your wife, as part of the bargain. And then the kinsman says, oh, did not know that. That's not going to work. That's going to endanger my present wife and my present heirs and so on, and mix everything up for me in terms of legality and inheritance and everything. So, would you please do it? Yes, I will, says Boaz. I was waiting for that question. So, as soon as the kinsman declines the offer, Boaz says, I'm going to buy the property, and I'm going to get Ruth as my wife. And then they transact that, and to make it official, they swap sandals. They take off a sandal, and the sandal's given to Boaz because the sandal had the impression of your foot on it. It was like a footprint, right? It's just like a signature, like a legal identification.
Wow.
You take the sandal to a man, the sandal molds to fit his foot, so if ever there's a question that he gave permission, you could take the sandal, match it to his foot, and say, yeah, this is the guy's sandal, so he gave permission, right? So he did that.
Bedouin souvenir
And then the party starts, and Boaz marries Ruth, and Ruth moves in to Boaz's home, and 9 months later they have a baby, and when the baby is born, they take the baby and they lay it on the knees of Naomi, and that was a gesture, meaning to lay the baby on the knees meant this baby is in some sense yours, right? So they lay the baby on the knees of Naomi, the barren mother-in-law whose 2 sons are dead, saying, now you have a line of descent. Now you have a line of inheritance because Boaz has done the job of the Redeemer. And that little baby was Obed, and he is in the line of descent of David. He's the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. And the last verse of the book of Ruth is the first time that the name of David is used in the Bible. That occurs, at least in the order of books as we know them. And so David is our hero. Isn't that right? Give it up for David, everybody! And you know that the name David, it means beloved one. Right? So he was the one who was beloved of God. And he turned out to be a great king for the people of Israel. So, folks, I've told the story of Ruth in a funny way, and we've had some laughs along the way. Part of the reason I tell it in that way is to keep from crying, because that's the other thing that happens when I read Ruth. It's such a beautiful story. I get choked up every time I work through it. Boaz is a great type of Christ. Christ is our bridegroom. Christ is our redeemer. Christ is our goel. He has become our kinsman by taking on our human nature. And he became our kinsman in this city. He took on our nature and became our relative by taking flesh right in this area that we are at today. And he came back to marry us. And you know, it's interesting that in the church's tradition, we read a romantic poem from the Song of Songs chapter 2, just a couple days before Christmas Eve. It's kind of an elopement poem about this handsome suitor bounding down out of the hills and inviting his beloved to run off with him. And you think, and it's so full of spring imagery. It's from from Song of Songs chapter 2. And you think to yourself, it's the dead of winter, it's like December 22nd, Christmas is a few days off. Why are we reading this romantic springtime poem about two lovers who are going to run off together? And the reason is because the church fathers saw Christmas as a romance and a marriage, where it is the marriage of divine nature with human nature. And Jesus is a wedding in a person. In one person, he is the joining of God's nature with man's nature. And they become one flesh in Jesus. So, Jesus is the one in whom is strength. He is our Boaz. And we are his bride who make a covenant with him. And just as Boaz fed Ruth with the gift of finest wheat, so Jesus feeds us with the finest wheat of the Eucharist. And just as Boaz spread the wing of his garment over Ruth, Jesus longs to spread his wings over us and care for us. So that's the end of the story.
Yay! Oh, no.
So again, we are in the main street of Bethlehem.